I love the way Dave Butler thinks. I could sit and talk with him for hours and hours about the scriptures and gospel topics. This episode is about his book, In the Language of Adam, a book that focuses in on the language of the visionary men found throughout the scriptures, a temple tradition anchored in on the prophet Isaiah. This episode is brought to you by Scripture Notes. This is the application that I use to do my study, to help write my book. One of the features it has here is collection notes. You can see that this is on the royal procession up here. You can see all of the different verses that I have pulled in to take a look at what this topic is, how to reference the royal procession. I've got all of my notes here next to each one of these verses. It's a great way to study. Go to scripturenotes.com to find out more and to register for free. Here we go. All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we bring on author Dave Butler. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
Really happy you're back here. Last time we spoke, you hadn't come out with your book yet. So I want to review your book. By the way, those that don't see it on the camera, this is Dave's book, In the Language of Adam, right? In the Language of Adam. Will you just give us a very broad description of what the book is about?
Yeah. The argument is that the Book of Mormon writers, at this point, I think all of them except for Zeniff, I think he's noticeably different. But I think the Book of Mormon writers are all of them temple men. They're temple initiates, or we might, in an LDS vocabulary, say they're endowed. And or they, in the New Testament language, would be their eyes have seen, their ears have heard the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. And that matters. That matters. That affects how they write, because their assumption is that at least some part of their audience is going to be similarly insiders, similarly participants in an esoteric worship of God, and so they construct their sermons and their prophecies, and sometimes even passages that appear to be straight historical narrative are influenced by the imagery, the doctrine, the language, the names of this worship experience that they know. So I'm exploring what that language is, what that ordinance or experience is in this book.
So before we delve into that, I want to go over something that we experience in the church right now, and that is, there are several factions or groups of individuals in the church that are starting to see and believe that the temple is not real, and that you've got Joseph Smith versus Brigham Young, and Brigham Young is the one who brings in the ordinances, or Joseph Smith starts off the temple with his affiliation with the Masons, and this is where it all begins. The problem with all of this is that if you understand the scriptures, the temple is already everywhere. And before Joseph Smith, whether you're looking at the Book of Mormon, which is what we're going to focus on here, or on the New Testament or the Old Testament, the temple is everywhere. The endowment, the anointing, and even the sealing, if you're looking at coronation, these are aspects of the temple that are found throughout all of Scripture.
Yeah, I'm aware of some of this kind of movement, and it makes me sad. I worry. I think people are potentially harming themselves. I think they're only harming themselves when they cut themselves off from the temple tradition, which is described in Book of Mormon language as cutting yourself off from the presence of the Lord and cutting yourself off from the tree of life. Those phrases are both used. It's a grave mistake. Yes, I think this stuff is absolutely in the Old Testament. It's in the New Testament. In the Book of Mormon, it is surprisingly prevalent once you kind of learn to see it. It's not incidental. It's at the heart. So this is sort of relevant to what I think is going on in terms of the worship of these. I call them the visionary men, but these these temple worshiping prophets. But Hans Dieter Betz, in his essays on the Sermon on the Mount, talks about the Sermon on the Mount, and he says, what is this? By the way, man, he walks up to the edge of saying about 10 different super interesting things. One of the things he says, though, in that is he says the book is, I'm paraphrasing, but the book is an engine to allow you, it itself is not, the Sermon on the Mount is an engine theologically. It's not, you don't repeat it as your theology, but knowing the Sermon on the Mount, you are spiritually empowered to prophesy, to create true doctrine, right? And with one nuance, which is to say, I don't think that this is principally or exclusively a text. I think the Sermon on the Mount is an ordinance and was known as an ordinance. But I think that's exactly right. I think that experience is the wellspring of great sermons like 2 Nephi 2 and 2 Nephi 9, and is also driving the narrative engine in the encounter at Ammonihah and other places. So it's not that cutting yourself off from the temple is sort of a tragedy. It's a willful act of self-blinding. It will reduce what you perceive in Scripture.
Well, I even make the argument that anciently this was actually, it wasn't necessarily certainly for the majority of the people. I mean, it wasn't, the Scriptures weren't the major tie to the Word of God necessarily. They didn't have the Scriptures, but they did have the drama. They did have the temple. And this is something that tied them. They looked at this as their doctrine, the stories that they would hear and see acted out at the festivals, the king being involved, the queen being involved, them being involved in this and participating in this would deepen their understanding of the doctrine of honestly, of Christ and the plan of salvation as they would go through this. So to say that you're going to sever yourself from the temple is not understanding history. It's not understanding the Scriptures, and we are a temple-centered people because we have always been, to the time of Adam, been a temple-centered people, right? And looking back to that drama. Now you've got, what I want to do is move to, you're focused here on the Book of Mormon. And going back, as you say here, looking at the subtitle of what you have here, it says it is, boy, I'm going to need my glasses here, reading Scripture like the Book of Mormon's visionary men. Let's talk real quick. Are the visionary men the initiates?
Yeah, I think so. There are various terms used to describe in the Book of Mormon the community of those who are in the know. So the ancient Israelite religion that the Nephites have clearly has an inside and an outside aspect. And there's a great Alma 6 where, in fact, I might even pull it up. In Alma 6, there's the phrase "the children of God" appears in a context that suggests that the children of God is not everybody in what we think of as the church, but is some people. So this is between Alma 5, which is a great esoteric discourse. I'm going to go give 3 different firesides this weekend about Alma 5, actually. And then Alma 7, which is another speech. We get this setting the church in order. And Alma 6, then in verses 5 and 6, now I would that ye should understand that the word of God was liberal unto all, that none were deprived of the privilege of assembling themselves together to hear the word of God. So he has to reassure you, everybody is welcome. Nevertheless, the children of God were commanded that they should gather themselves together oft and join in fasting and mighty prayer on behalf of the welfare of the souls of those who knew not God. So that's not everybody. That's somebody. There's somebody that's a subset of the children of God. By the way, Hans Dieter Betz also says the purpose of the Sermon on the Mount is to transform you into a child of God. So again, really, really close to saying some super interesting things. But the first term we hear for these guys is probably visionary men. And this is a term Lehi is accused of being a visionary man, and he accepts it. He owns it. Now, he says, I would not have, seen the great things I have seen if I were not a visionary man. I don't know if I don't know if Lehi, Nephi, their descendants would literally have used the terms day-to-day, visionary or visionary men to describe themselves or each other. But with Lehi owning it in the text, that's a convenient term for me to use for these prophets who know the inner religion, the sacred secrets, the plain and precious things, who worship together apart from the public.
And we might also look at this then as the visionary men as a parallel to something along the lines of Isaiahites. Is that right?
Oh, I think it's very likely that they're basically direct descendants. So Isaiah is understood to have had disciples in a community, and one way we see that is just the massive influence that Isaiah has had. He's quoted in all the Gospels, right? He's quoted in the Book of Mormon. He's loved by the Dead Sea Scrolls people. But another way is, if we look at the book of Isaiah, it seems that somebody is continuing to publish material under the name of Isaiah after the original guy is probably dead. That may not be true, but that's a common understanding, right? And it's likely. So
are you talking about within the book of Isaiah itself?
Within the book of Isaiah itself, yeah. So the thought is generally that Isaiah 2 through 39 are written by the original prophet of Isaiah of Jerusalem, or disciples really close to him. So that's called First Isaiah. Okay. Even within that, commentators will look at that and say some of this stuff we think is added later. Second Isaiah, man, there are misconceptions on this. I heard some misconceptions in an interview I saw yesterday. Second Isaiah is not a guy who lived later and wrote a different book. Second Isaiah is a collection of chapters like 40 to 55, usually something like that, which are thought to have been written down later, but not necessarily by a guy, but by disciples of Isaiah's. And also, it is commonplace. So John Eaton in his Festal something in Deutero-Isaiah, I'm forgetting the title, the Festal tradition in Deutero-Isaiah, or Klaus Balzer in his commentary on Second Isaiah, both say, look, it's not Isaiah and then nothing and then Second Isaiah, it's Isaiah and then there's disciples passing things on orally or as individual, discrete, separate texts that later get added. This matters, by the way, to the Book of Mormon in two different ways. One is, where does Lehi come from? What is his background that makes him and his sons love Isaiah so much? Well, maybe he's one of these disciples of Isaiah, or he's connected with them, right? He's close into them. That's not to say he couldn't also be a merchant or a blacksmith, right? Fine, but he seems to be in the know on what's up with these Isaiah circles. But also there's an idea out there that the fact that the Book of Mormon includes some of this Second Isaiah stuff, and I'm sorry, Greg, I don't know if you wanted to go here, but I'm going to go here.
That's fine, yeah.
Okay. There's a view that the inclusion of some Deutero-Isaiah content is obviously a strike against the Book of Mormon, but actually that's not obvious at all, because it looks like a criticism if you simplify the idea of Deutero-Isaiah and you think there's Isaiah the second and he lived at this time and he wrote the later book, but that's not the hypothesis. The hypothesis is that texts are being generated, including orally, and being passed on orally and eventually, or in discrete written text, and eventually put into the book, right? So if that's the case, then Lehi could easily have been connected into the disciples of Isaiah and had access to those texts. In fact, fantastically. Should we look at another passage? Sure. All right. Second Nephi 5. Pretty sure. If I'm wrong, we'll see it in a moment. So Second Nephi 6. I was off by a chapter. So here's Jacob and he's going to quote 2 chapters out of the book of Isaiah. And before that, he's even going to quote some verses. And the parts of Isaiah that he's going to quote are from 2nd Isaiah. So they're the parts that some people say, oh, Lehi couldn't possibly have known this. This stuff was too late for Lehi, right? We'll take a look at verse 5 and how Jacob refers to these. He says, "Now the words which I shall read," so he's looking at a written document, okay, "are they which Isaiah spake concerning all the house of Israel. Wherefore they may be likened unto you for a year of the house of Israel. And there are many things which have been spoken by Isaiah which shall be likened unto you." This seems to suggest that Jacob's got a written document. We don't know when it was written down, but that he understands that Isaiah was an oral prophet, that he spoke things, right? And this is completely consistent with the idea that there's a community, it's passing on verbal prophecies of Isaiah, and Lehi and Nephi have those with them as they leave Jerusalem. So I can't remember why we were talking about Deutero-Isaiah in the first place. What got us onto this?
Well, we're just going down the path of talking about why it would matter in the Book of Mormon, but it's talking about the visionary men. Are these Isaiahites?
Oh yeah. So I think
right?
the answer is
yeah. And is this the tradition? Because it's always been for me, that the Book of Mormon is clearly, when you really dig into it and study it, it is completely written around the Book of Isaiah. I mean, this is yes, they have the entire brass plates and they use them very well, but it's Isaiah that drives this, and Isaiah that we are basically getting, I think, an amalgamation of the tradition of Joseph being passed through the brass plates on one hand, and the tradition of Isaiah within that are being brought together here and this is what the result of that is, right? It's what is the tradition of Isaiah? What made him the prophet, right? When you refer to the prophet, it's Isaiah that's the prophet.
Yeah.
And then what makes them so unique is Josephites.
Yeah.
That brings those two things together. Isaiah and Joseph being brought together here as this portion of Israel, given the responsibility. Would Lehi have been called if he wasn't a visionary man? Would Lehi have been called to run with his own exodus if he did not have these connections with Isaiah and been, tied into this idea of what we would call the plain and precious things?
Yeah.
Right. That have obviously been lost. And is the tradition of Isaiah, there's a term in Jeremiah that I love. Isaiah or Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah is a book of calamity, right? It is, everything is falling apart in Jerusalem. There will be a future new covenant, though. There's hope that's presented here. But everything is falling apart. Is it the tradition of Isaiah that is really what's got to be preserved for the remnant, right? Is the tradition of Isaiah then the idea of the fullness of the gospel, the central port that centered on Christ, which the Book of Mormon obviously is, and centered on the temple? Right? Is this the tradition that Lehi has got to bring with him, that he's already possibly rooted in, or possibly even converted to? I don't know. It's interesting to see that Laman and Lemuel are lost and the younger ones are not. Is Lehi always that way? I don't know. But he's definitely bringing this tradition of Isaiah, which has got to be the plain and precious things.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think Lehi is a time capsule. Lehi is R2D2 and C3PO in the escape pod going off to save precious information, right? The Leia's message to Obi-Wan Kenobi. But I think that's right. It's people say, they go, oh, if you could, and when in the afterlife, when you could talk to anybody, who would you talk to? Like Isaiah of Jerusalem is my first choice. That guy, I want to know, like, what did you really see? What, because yes, I think they are Isaiahite disciples all the way to the end. Jesus himself says, read the prophecies of Isaiah, great are the words of Isaiah, which, by the way, in the Gospel of Matthew 13, and I won't read this. I didn't get on your podcast to read scriptures, but Jesus explains why he teaches in parables, and it has to do with the mysteries of the kingdom of God. And what he says is, I teach in parables because, I'm paraphrasing, but only slightly, you, my disciples, your eyes have seen, your ears have heard the mysteries of the kingdom of God. Therefore, you will understand the parables. And those people who have not beheld, have not participated in, have not been to the mysteries of the kingdom of God, will not understand the teaching, and they will not be harmed thereby. Right. And he then specifically connects this. He says he's fulfilling the prophecy of Isaiah 6. But I think what Isaiah 6 is not a prophecy. Isaiah 6, this is after Isaiah's call narrative. He's told to prophesy in a way that people will not understand. And those are the verses that Jesus is quoting. And I think he's identifying himself. And this is not to say, look, the greatness of Jesus, right, is that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. He came to offer himself as an atoning sacrifice. That is the unique greatness of Jesus. He was also a man who lived in a time and place. And as a man who lived in a time and place, he seems to have clearly identified himself as a disciple of the prophet Isaiah. Jesus
is a visionary man.
Yeah, he's a visionary man. And I think that's what Matthew 13 is exactly saying. And I think that's the key to understanding the Sermon on the Mount, for example.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, so let's dive into this a little bit. We're going to go into Lehi's dream. I'm not going to go through the chapters here or anything, so let's just have a bigger overview of this. We understand the symbolism to some degree of the Word of God and the iron rod. We've got the tree of life. We've got the great and spacious building. We've got the field out here. Will you walk us through what you think Lehi is saying and what this represents?
Yeah, this is the passage, Greg, that I stared at for 15 years, thinking, man, I can just feel that there's a temple thing here, and I can't see what it is. And I read all of these. All of this scholarship about Second Temple, Judaism, apocryphal and apocalyptic texts, ascent literature, Jewish mysticism, right? Like trying to figure it out. And then one day it kind of clicked. So this is a heavenly ascent text. There's a piece of it that is missing or is dislocated. And I think that causes us to not see it as a heavenly ascent text, on top of the fact that we don't really, this is not vocabulary we use from day to day. And, your average person in a pew is not reading the Book of Mormon looking for heavenly ascent texts. Okay. So let me rephrase that. This is a vision of an ascent into heaven, but heaven is the temple. So the ascent to heaven is playing out across 3-part space, sort of marked, identified 3-part space in 1 Nephi 8. And it is the 3-part space of Solomon's temple. And the reason why I think I at least took so long to see it is because in all of the sort of classic ascent texts, First Enoch 15 or Daniel or whatever, you get to the top and there's the throne of God, and like there's God on his throne, or sometimes like Third Enoch, the person who's ascending sits on God's throne and becomes some kind of an angelic being, right?
Like Abraham in Facsimile 3.
Or like Abraham in Facsimile 3. That's exactly right. So, and it said we have the tree, and we could talk about this, but actually the tree is the throne. So. Right. So maybe maybe we're just meant to understand that, or maybe we're meant to understand that actually we're meant to incorporate the vision in 1 Nephi 1. And so what we're meant to understand Lehi saw is what he reported in 1 Nephi 1, which is, right, the Book of Mormon strikingly opens with a vision of the throne of God. That is the Holy of Holies. Like, in verse 1, Nephi says, I knew the mysteries. And then here's the throne of God. And then we go, oh, there's no temple in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, the whole thing opens with a vision of
Yes.
basically Christ and a plethora, a host of heaven,
Right.
in the first chapter,
Singing.
is been removed in Jerusalem.
Right.
And it's all a temple. It's all temple, the whole thing.
It's all temple. Yeah. So including 1 Nephi 8. So let's walk through that. So the sort of three-part space is a little obfuscated by the way that it's narrated, because we get Lehi's perspective, and at first he's in darkness, and then he sort of jumps forward and he's at the tree. He goes from he skips the whole middle part, and then we get him looking back. Okay. But he tells us enough about the space, and he says the names of the spaces so that we can decipher what it is. So the first part of the space dwells very little upon that. He says it is a field as wide as it is the world. Okay. He calls it a great and spacious field, I think, at one point, but it's he compares it to the world, as wide as the world. Now, Solomon's temple is three-part space. The first space is, depending on whether you read Kings or Chronicles, because they are different, okay, is either a tower or it is a roofless porch. In either case, right, I suspect the roofless porch is probably what it was, but in either case, it's called the Ulam. That is the name of the first space, the Ulam, the porch, okay? When Lehi says, I saw a field as wide as the world, the word for world in Hebrew is olam. It's not spelled exactly the same, but it's very close. The difference is not actually the difference between the U and the O. Those are the same letters. The difference is between how heavy is the glottal stop at the beginning of the word, okay? Is it an aleph or an ein? So he calls out the name of the first room. He says this is the Ulam. It's the field as wide as it was in Olam. Then we get the big secondary, big middle space, which is a rectangular room. And this too has a name. The name is Heikal. And it also has an altar of incense. And it's interesting that we get mists of darkness in this space, okay? Which I think are the visionary representation. And Lehi's telling a dream, but the dream happens in a dream version of the temple. In this middle room version of the temple, the incense, clouds of incense, are mists of darkness, and they lead people astray. And it's also got people who are dressed in fine clothing. And now this is a little tricky. I believe that the King James Bible, the best value of it is that it helps us figure out the underlying words in the Book of Mormon. I think the Book of Mormon generally follows the King James translation, which means
we talked about this last week. I think it is the reason we have to stick to the King James version. We can't go to a newer version. I mean, it's good to use it for study, like the NIV, right. but the whole key is the Book of Mormon. And if you drop the King James version, especially with Isaiah, the things that are going to be unveiled over the next several years are going to be because of the King James language, the Jacobian language.
Yeah, I totally agree. So fine in the King James Old Testament is par excellence a description of things in the temple. Okay, whether it is and it's tricky because it refers to different underlying words in Hebrew. Okay, but like the meal offerings are fine meal, and the gold is fine gold that's put on the Holy of Holies. And here's the key thing: what the priests wear is all fine and fine twined linen. And so these people in fine clothing in this second room of the temple, who are jeering and pointing fingers seem to be dressed in the way temple priests are. And now it's specified that it's not just priests, it's men and women. I might say men, women, and children. At least it says men and women. So it's the ruling class. It's the class that controls the temple. They're dressed like priests. They're mocking the faithful who try to come forward, who are being misled by the incense, by the mists of darkness. Now, the name of this middle room, this is peculiar. The name in Hebrew of the room is Heikal. And this is a very old word. It goes back to Sumerian through Akkadian, okay? And it's actually two words in Sumerian. It's A-gal, which means A is house, gal is big. It means big house.
The big house.
The big house, where the Lugal, the big man, the king, lived. Okay, that's Sumerian, like 2500 BC or something. So, so that came down through Akkadian, came to Hebrew. Heikal is any palace. So it's used to describe, the king's palace, for example. It's also used to describe the entire. There's ambiguity because the whole building of the temple is called the Heikal, but also this one room is called the Heikal. Okay. And what it literally means in some dictionaries, literally what it will say is any large or spacious building. So this is interesting because it is at this point where we have the mist of darkness that we see a great and spacious building. Literally, the word for a great and spacious building in biblical Hebrew would be a Heikal. I see a Heikal. So again, Lehi is calling out the name of the second room. And he also says it stood as it were above the earth, or as it were in midair or something, right? And as it were is kind of funny. Like it's not literally, but there's something in some other non-literal sense.
Like unto. Yeah.
Like unto. Now it's odd. Here's a grammatical fact about Hebrew. This is true about modern Hebrew. It's true about biblical Hebrew. So if I go down to Arizona, I'd say I halach, I nasa, I travel or I walk. Okay. But if I go from here, which is to say I'm in Utah, but anywhere that's not in Israel, to Israel, I ascend. I go up. And from Israel, I ascend to Jerusalem. And from Jerusalem, I ascend onto the Temple Mount. And from the Temple Mount, I ascend into the temple. And from the first room, I ascend into the second. So that linguistically, there's a linguistic ideology that God's mountain is literally the highest place on earth. Because to go from the Holy of Holies, the third room of the temple, to anywhere on earth in Hebrew, you go down, you yarad. And to go from anywhere to that highest point, you ascend. Now, obviously, there are plenty of places. Israel's low-lying, Jerusalem's close to the sea. I don't know what the elevation is, like 1,000 feet or something. I don't know. I am higher elevation where I am right now by several thousand feet. Linguistically, though.
What's interesting also, just real quick as a tangent, is that the Dead Sea is the lowest place on earth.
Oh, yeah, interesting. Which is right there. Yeah, in the Rift Valley. So there's this. So this is perfect. Lehi is showing us in vision. The second room is named the Heikal, but he's also giving us this image of the temple. And the temple is full of prideful people, and they are jeering at the faithful. And that what they are doing is causing people to get confused. And later in the chapter, I think it's verse 33, he refers to that great and spacious building as Nephi refers to the great and spacious building as strange. Strange in King James, it can be nekar or it can be zar, but both those words mean foreign. They don't mean queer. They mean odd. They mean foreign. So the great and spacious building is strange. Nephi, Lehi, in some sense, are communicating their perception that. So this is the second room of the temple, and there's also waters that pass by, and here the waters are the filthy waters of hell. But also that because the name is the same, Heikal, this is the image of the Jerusalem temple. It is full of people who are misleading the faithful and are in some sense foreign. They're under foreign influence in Nephi's or Lehi's view.
So that's very interesting because what you're doing, what I love about this is just, again, that temple imagery. It's like the cipher on this is you have, as you know, I believe that the last week of Jesus's life is the temple experience.
Mm-hmm.
And as Jesus goes to the temple from the east door, the east wall, he goes to the temple and he cleans it out, but he's not crowned there because he can't be, because this is not the king going, this is the King of Kings. And he actually has to do the real condescension that will happen with the Romans and on the cross and in Gethsemane, etc. And then ascend from, be raised up from in his resurrection. But on his way to doing all of this, it's the elites, it's the high priests of the temple that are going to basically try him with Pilate, and are the ones that are actually going to accuse him, pointing their fingers to death instead of Barabbas. Right? It's those in the fine twined linen.
Yep.
Specifically, the fine twined linen, the high priests.
Yep.
Are the ones in front of Pilate that are going to condemn Christ. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah. And there's a lot to say, right? Because there's sort of on the symbolic level, there's a whole Day of Atonement conversation to have here where it has to be the priest that sacrifices the sacrificial offering. Mm-hmm. So, whereas Jesus is the goat, is the bull being offered, it has to be the high priest who's offering the true spiritual version of himself, right?
Yeah.
There's also like this interesting historical question, which is, man, what happened that we get to Jerusalem in the 1st century AD, and there's a whole bunch of people who seem mostly not to be elites. There are a few elites who remember, right? Nicodemus, mm-hmm. right? And also when Jesus comes into Jerusalem, this is I forget who made this observation, it's an old one. Even though his ministry has all been out like in Galilee and in the hills and stuff, he comes to Jerusalem and there are people with a room waiting for him. So he has people in Jerusalem who know him and who are part of his movement and who own property, right? Mm-hmm. But how is it that there is this stream of belief, of awareness, of expectation, not among the elites, that recognizes Jesus and sweeps him up and says, this is the king, and brings him in, celebrating like Palm Sunday, right? So Palm Sunday, like Sukkot, throwing down the palms, bringing the king in to be enthroned, which is, by the way, to be raised up on the tree, his throne. Mm-hmm. And the elites are mostly in a different stream, right? In a different stream that somehow is not conscious or has forgotten or denies everything that would be necessary to see Jesus for who he is, right? Like there's a big historical conversation. And to connect to your earlier point, I mean, I think Lehi and Jesus are part of the Isaiah movement. And I suspect this also connects with David appoints musical prophets in the temple in the book of Chronicles. And when in Luke, Mary and Joseph take Jesus into the temple, and there are people there, right? Simeon and Hannah and Anna, but Anna is the same name as Hannah, who is a singing mother of a prophet in the Old Testament. And it seems that this is maybe one of the one of the currents that sort of has preserved this understanding is there are still guilds of temple singers or people who are associated with the temple that carry this this old knowledge which I think is the same knowledge or a similar knowledge to what Lehi takes out of Jerusalem when he flees.
Yeah, which is, and by the way, I talked about Jeremiah, but I never got to what I was saying about a phrase that I loved. I never brought the phrase up, but it's the old paths.
Oh, yeah.
It's the old paths that he talks about, which have been lost, right? So it's Jeremiah talks about those of the old paths. It goes right back to that idea of the way. Right. What is the way? Well, the way is the old path. That's the way. It's the way of Christ that has been removed and destroyed and taken away. We talked about, and I saw it just today here in your book. It's Derek. Derek is the way in Hebrew. And it goes back to that idea again of DBR with DR as the furrow or the way, right? And that's been removed. And so those of the old path still are around. They still exist. But as you're saying, as visionary men, they're underground, it seems. They're like this underground society that has to talk in code because perhaps free speech has been completely removed. And so they talk in code because if they don't, I don't think it's, and what I'm saying is, I don't think it's just a matter of an esoteric teaching. Jesus talks about this. Be careful about what you say, how you say it. And he ends up talking in parables. And so there's a way that you're talking about this that may not just be, okay, well, I've got to be careful because of sacred things and
right,
eyes to see and ears to hear, but maybe it's more than that. I mean, Isaiah himself, I believe, and you believe, right, that he's living in a time where maybe the first major influx of Deuteronomic influence and power has been exerted. And so why is he writing this way? Right? Yeah. Why does he write this way? And maybe it's like, okay, well, this is how it has to be. We're going to borrow this tradition of Isaiah, understanding his environment, because he's kind of the first major guy that had to live under this. Yeah. Does that make sense to you?
100%. Yeah, you're saying, look, maybe there's an element of sacred things, sacred pearls before swine, but also maybe there's a risk if you get killed if you say the wrong thing. And so you learn to prophesy in a non-speech friendly regime. Yeah. which would have seemed very foreign to me as a young man.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. All right, going on to the tree of life here. This is something where I think we have a little bit of a disparity of thought on this, but I think overall, I think we kind of agree we're on the same team. But tell me more about the tree of life. All right, so we're going in Lehi's dream. Yeah, everyone's moving toward the tree of life. We both see that as the throne of God. It's sitting in the Holy of Holies.
Yeah, it's behind the straight and narrow path.
This behind is the straight and narrow path, right? So you got to get in the straight and narrow path to get there. And by the way, this means that if the Hekal, and looking at that as the middle room there, it's those that would be right there at the straight and narrow path that are having the fingers pointed at them, right? Yeah. It's the ones that are on their way then have come through and they're on the way into the tree and getting to the tree. They're the ones that are being laughed at and mocked.
It's such an interesting vision, I think, the more you understand it, because it's on the one hand terrifying because what Lehi is saying is the most sacred of things has been seized by the enemy.
Yes. I fully believe that. Yes.
Yeah. The redeeming point is you can still get through, right? Because he makes it and some of his family makes it. And this is, I think, really what the Book of Mormon is all about. In the same way that Matthew 7 has a straight and narrow gate behind which leads to life, and then what's immediately behind it is a tree with good fruit. Here we have a straight and narrow path, and there is a tree which is described in 1 Nephi 11 as being the tree of life, which has fruit that is very desirable to make one happy, I think is what Lehi says, or Nephi quotes Lehi saying, right? And he eats it, and the reaction is joy. And this is what. And now there's another interesting detail. So you hold on to the iron rod as you go along the straight and narrow path. And the conventional LDS pictures of this, the path is long, and it goes all the way along the long, the whole vision, and it has like a hand railing. And man, I remember hearing people's seminary teachers when I was a kid say, on the Temple Mount, there was a hand railing so you could climb up or whatever. I don't think that's it. I think it's well-intentioned. The Word of God is Christ. The Word of God is Christ. And if you look at the language in 1 Nephi 8, we are told that people going through the straight and narrow path, 4 times there is some kind of language for seizing, holding on to, grasping the iron rod, just to say Christ. So I think this is what this literally is a vision of a straight and narrow path in which you meet Christ and in some sense grasp him 4 times and then enter into the presence of the tree of life on the other side. Here again, he calls out the name, okay? And the name of the third room is Debir. Now, if you look, and you've talked about this as sort of a way to think about this is the 3 English letters or Roman characters, DBR, right? Mm-hmm. Dalet, Beit, Resh. So that B can be a V or it can be a B sound in Hebrew, depending. Okay, it can be either. So this room is called the Debir. Now, what does that mean? Well, some dictionaries will tell you that it may mean just the back part. Okay, maybe it does, but it also seems to be related to the word for speech, which is so davar means word. Okay, the iron rod, word of God. Here we are. Now we're in the place of the word, and that understanding led some translations of the Bible to refer to this room as the oracle. So it was the debir, the place of the word, the place of speaking, the oracle. This seems to be Lehi's understanding. So right now, he could even be philologically wrong. Maybe the professors are right. Brown, Driver, Briggs are right. And historically, objectively, it means the back parts. But some people have thought debir meant the place of speech. Lehi seems to be one of them because he stands and speaks with a loud voice, which is to say, if we're constructing an underlying Hebrew, he deber in the place of the debir. Okay. So again, he calls out the name Ulam, saying the field is like the Olam. He calls out the name Hakal, saying there is a great and spacious building, which is a Hakal. I think literally, if he's telling this to his son, he says, and Vahaya Hakal, there was a Hakal there, okay? And he calls out the name of the Holy of Holies, he says, and I stood there and debarti in the debir, okay? Mm-hmm. Calling his family to come forward into the presence of the tree with good fruit, which I think is the throne of God. And I think that's we talk about detail, but at a high level, the reason that the Book of Mormon writers are obsessed with the Garden of Eden is because the Garden of Eden is the story of the ascent that Lehi has just communicated to us. We see this maybe most clearly in Alma 13. We can talk about that, but the story of that ascent of the ordinance that he's just in bare bones described in a vision in which terrifying things have gone wrong is expulsion from Eden. You're created, you're expelled from Eden, you're instructed in commandments, but also in sort of practices of holiness like fasting and praying. You experience a death and a resurrection, and then you are brought back into the presence of back to Eden, where you where the story starts with the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It ends with the fruit of the tree of life having returned to Eden.
Yeah. That's as I say, I think that's a chiasmus, right? That's 2 Nephi 2:25 when you pull those two together. But you have with the DBR idea also looking at the Debir. I think that it's just so natural to me to understand that is the word. That's where, again, those who have ears to hear. Well, where is that voice coming from? Where is that? I mean, what are the visions that are always given to the visionary men and others? It's of the throne in the Holy of Holies, right? That's where that's coming from, and everything in that hierarchical structure that you always see in those visions is coming out from the throne, right? And then, of course, you get, in Psalm 110, for example, when you talk about the order, which is the priesthood, it's the Melchizedek priesthood, the order of Melchizedek, it's Divrait, which is, I'm pretty sure that's sort of Divrait, I think is usually how you would put that in Hebrew. That it's the same thing. That's the order, that's the priesthood that's coming out. And that's what priesthood really is, right? When we talk about where is the priesthood held, what is the priesthood? Well, it's manifest in the ordinances of the temple.
Yeah,
that's the core that you're getting out of there. Now, back to the tree of life, though, because a lot of people are going to ask, Dave, well, the tree of life isn't the throne of God. The tree of life is in the Hekal.
Yeah.
Right. It's in there. It's in there with the wine and the bread of the presence and etc. So how can you be saying that the tree of life is in the Holy of Holies?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So first of all, a connection we're making. And this, I don't know how far we're going to go down these roads. There's potentially a lot to say. So I suspect we'll say a few things and leave other things unsaid and invite people to hear other conversations we've had or read the book even. Here's the oddity, and then I'll tell you what I think explains the oddity. The oddity is that there are I'll call them prose accounts or historical accounts that describe the temple. Okay, First Kings 6 and 7, 2 Chronicles 3 and 4, but also Exodus, which describes the tabernacle. Some scholars have even thought that the tabernacle, I don't think this, but some people have thought the tabernacle didn't even exist. It's just the temple projected backwards in time, and the real tabernacle was a simple tent. But even if that was a different thing, it's clearly basically the same pattern, right? And all three of those patterns say that there is a 7-branched tree, which is to say it is a lamp with 7 arms, but they're described as having leaves and fruit, and the arms are branches. So it seems pretty clearly to be a tree. And there's a whole lot of other literature, secondary literature we can go chase. It is very non-controversial for us to say not only is the menorah a tree, but it's understood to be the tree of life. That's very common understanding. So here's the oddity. Okay. The oddity is that the prose accounts put that in the middle. They put that in the Hekal. Kings, Chronicles, Exodus, they put it in the Hekal. But the visionary accounts always put it in the back. That's true of 1 Nephi 8. You have to go through the straight and narrow path. Then there's the tree of life. It's true of Matthew 7. You have to go through the straight and narrow gate, which leads to life, and there's the tree with good fruit. It's true also of Revelation 22, which is the very end of the Bible as we have it organized, right? It's a vision of the New Jerusalem as a restored temple. And there, beside the throne of God, which is to say, in the Holy of Holies, is the tree of life. Revelation.
John knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. So that's the question, right? Do John, Nephi, and Matthew know what they're talking about? Are they smoking crack? Is there a difference of opinion? How do we get these two differences? So here is my hypothesis. This is absolutely my hypothesis. The only thing I have to offer in my defense is that I'm obviously right. But I will say this was quite fun for me. When Margaret Barker's most recent book came out late last year, and I got my copy, I found myself footnoted. I think it's on page 77 maybe. But it's
you sent me a text right when you got to it.
Yeah, that's right. Like everyone I knew, I'm like, look at this. And God bless her, she got my name wrong. It's fine. It's clearly me. I'll take it. And it was this. This is the stuff. This is actually, it was this idea that I initially reached out to Margaret with in 2012 when I met her and said, "Hey, what do you think about this?" We had our first conversations. So here's what I think. Here's what I think happened. Okay. 2 Kings 18:4 says that Hezekiah cut down Karat, the Asherah. Karat, by the way, fun fact, because in Hebrew, a decree of divorcement is a sefer, a book, keritut, a book of cutting. The idea of karat has a slight echo. Yes, it is cut down, but has a slight echo of divorced. Interesting.
Well, it's also covenant, right? So it's a splitting of a covenant. You're splitting the covenant of marriage.
Yeah. Well, okay, very good. So there have been some questions about what is this? What does this mean he actually did, that he cut down the Asherah? I think that what he did is that he is the one who moved. And as you say, I think it may have been under influence from an influx of Northerners, right? We don't know who came. It wasn't necessarily all just peasants. What if nobility, influential, persuasive people, rich supporters came down? Somebody who said, "Hey," and one thing Hezekiah did, for which he gets a lot of praise, is cut down the Asherah. I think it is that he moved the menorah from the third room into the second. Now, there's a lot of reasons why I think so. Isaiah 5. Well, let's see. I'll give the short version. We can go long version if you want to.
Let's go long.
Let's go long. Okay, fine. So we'll talk about Isaiah 3-6, and maybe even the Sefer Bahir. Mm-hmm. So Isaiah 3-6, 3, 4, 5, 6, 4 chapters. I think what they describe is an apostasy in Isaiah's day, and the response, the divine response. Okay, and it's using this term sort of broadly. It's a chiastic account, because chapter 3 says, "Here is the apostasy." Chapter 4 says, "Here is a divine response." Chapter 5 says, "Here's another way to see the apostasy." Chapter 6 says, "Here's another way to see the divine response." And I think it all needs to be read together, because I think Isaiah is talking in a time when a wrong word can get you killed. Yeah. And he is close to the king. He works in the temple, which is basically the king's royal chapel. And this is why I want to meet the man Isaiah, because he's like a little bit this prophet poet, but also like a little bit 007. Like, I want, like, what really happened? So here to kind of recap. In fact, I'll pull it up, and I won't necessarily quote, but I'll pull it up and look at it myself just to make sure I'm not missing any key point I want to make. And some of this is significantly clearer if you can read a little Hebrew. Okay. So Isaiah 3 describes an apostasy. What kind of apostasy is it? It's a lack of leadership. Okay. The mighty man, the man of war, the judge, the prophet, the prudent, the captain 50, the honorable man, princes are replaced by children. Speaking of divorce, if the prince with a sacred marriage obligation is a child, right? Maybe not literally, but failing in his obligation. So
this period could have been Hezekiah.
And well, it could have been Hezekiah, right? That is the interesting. He
is not king here.
Yeah, I suspect that 3-6, though they don't say this, I suspect that they basically all happened during the reign of Hezekiah. And again, I think they're labeled and ordered the way they are and written deliberately, opaquely the way they are. Yes, to preserve the life of the people who were writing this. So what's the solution? What's the attempt to fix this problem? Verse 6, man takes hold of his brother of the house of his father. Okay, you have clothing, you be the ruler. He says, I can't be a healer. So we're looking for someone to be a ruler and also a healer, which is to say the king who is also the Nehushtan, maybe, okay, the high priest. But he says, I can't be a ruler or a healer. I don't have bread or clothing. Now I don't have bread. I think what this is priestly / royal. Okay, we need a leader. What is that? It is a ruler who is also a healer. That is the priest who bears the healing Nehushtan on his staff, who incarnates the Lord Yahweh. Okay, and the response is, I can't. Leadership ultimately fails. And why can't I? No bread, no clothing. Okay, now there's a promise, and I think it's a few verses later where it says, verse 10, say unto the righteous, they will still be able to eat the fruit. Okay, now I'm cherry picking just a few verses rather than commenting on the whole thing. But this is the basic situation, a complete crisis of leadership at the top. But there is a promise. Don't worry, the fruit, which is the same thing as the bread. Jesus is the fruit, is the bread, is the manna. These are all the same thing. You will still be able to eat the fruit. Help is coming. Help comes in chapter 4. Now, this is one account of the response. In that day shall 7 women take hold of one man, saying, we will eat the bread and wear our own clothes. Right? This is what was missing in chapter 3 is bread and clothing. 7 women provide it. But they still need a man to bear the name. What does that mean? Well, again, the priest, the high priest who incarnates the Lord, who bears the healing staff of the Nehushtan, also wears the tzitz, the petalon on his forehead that says the name, the Lord. Yahweh, he literally bears the name. We need a man so that the name can be born. And then in verse 2, again, there's reiterated the promise that the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and comely. So don't worry, you'll be able to eat the fruit. So failure of royal priestly leadership, heaven in the form of 7 women. Okay, we'll come back and talk about that. Choose someone else. And I think what they're doing is, this is Isaiah. This is one version. This is the version we don't notice of Isaiah's calling. And I know people sometimes read this as a prophecy about polygamy. I don't think it is. I think this is about the response of heaven to the apostasy in Isaiah's day. So that,
well, it's also following up from the previous chapter in chapter 3, right, where it's showing that the men have died of war. Now, of course, that could also be talking about men that have fallen away in an apostasy.
Sure.
Right.
Sure. Absolutely. So, okay. Genesis 5. Now that's the small bit. Genesis 5. All right. Genesis 5, Isaiah 5, I'm going to sort of, let me skip to the heart of it. There's other stuff we can talk about. Let me skip to verses 18 to 20 and talk about that. That'll give us enough to talk about here. There's other super interesting details starting in the very first verse, but we'll read 18 to 20. So I read a commentary about this, J.J.M. Roberts, and this is funny. He said about verse 18, he said, I can't even figure out what the sin is the people are committing here. It just seems to be an image that they're committing lots of sins. I think that's wrong. I think this is Isaiah telling us he was a witness of Hezekiah removing the tree of life and light from its true place in the Holy of Holies. And also Isaiah telling us his reaction to it. And I think even if we read Hebrew, it would be easy to miss what's going on. But through the English translation, it's virtually impossible. So, woe unto them that draw iniquity with cords of vanity and sin, as it were, with a cart rope. Now, imagine this is a physical scene. I think that's what it is. There are men, they are pulling something with a rope. There is something big. they're pulling it with a rope, that say, let him make speed and hasten his work that we may see it. Oh, so the thing they're pulling has been invisible until now. For instance, hidden behind the veil in the back room of the temple, possibly. Okay. Let him make speed and hasten his work that we may see it. And let the counsel of the Holy One of Israel draw nigh and come that we may know it. This is the kick in the gut here, Greg. This is the bit that when I read it in Hebrew for the first time and saw what actually saying, I cried. So, two things. Counsel. So how do we read this in Sunday school? Tell us what your plan is, Holy One of Israel, so we can know your plan. Counsel is etzah. Yes, it does mean counsel. It also means tree. Let the tree of the Holy One of Israel draw nigh and come. Now again, what's the hypothesis? It's that the tree of life has been in the Holy of Holies until this minute. And now there are men at the behest of Hezekiah, maybe, with ropes hauling it out so it will become visible for the first time. Let him make speed, hasten his work that we can see it. Let the tree of the Holy One of Israel, that's the great Menorah, draw nigh and come that we may know it. Now that we may know it sounds innocuous until you look at Genesis 19:5. And Genesis 19:5 is Lot in Sodom, and he's got angels visiting. Mm-hmm. And the men of Sodom come around the house, and they called unto Lot, and they said unto him, where are the men which came in to thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. It's the same word, nedah, that we may know. It has nothing to do with knowledge. This is the cry of a howling mob that wants rape. And in Lot's case, these are the men of Sodom, and what they want to do is rape the angels. And that is the same thing that Isaiah is saying about the scene he is witnessing. Let the counsel, let the tree of the Holy One of Israel, the tree of life, draw nigh and come, that we may know her. For Isaiah, this is the rape of an angel. Now, let me point out another verse that I think corroborates that this is the right reading. And we skipped over it. It's back in Isaiah 3. And I want to say it's 3 verse 8. Let's see. No, it's not 8. It's 9. I was close, though. I was close. Because Isaiah, in describing, again, 3 and 5 are describing the apostasies. 4 and 6 describe the restorations or the response of heaven. So in 3, when he was previously describing this apostasy, verse 9, he says, there it is. The show of their countenance doth witness against them. They declare their sin as Sodom. They hide it not. Now, I don't think 3 verse 9 is Isaiah saying, and some commentaries will say this, and I think it's ridiculous. Oh, there must have been a fad for homosexuality in 8th century Judah. I don't think so. I think Isaiah is a much better poet than that. I think what he's saying is the men of Sodom wanted to rape the angels. The men of Judah did it. And not only did they do it, what chapter 3, verse 9 says is, the show of their countenance doth witness against them. They declare their sin as Sodom. They hide it not. I think that's actually a commentary on 2 Kings 18:4 and 5, where the historians talking about the reign of Hezekiah say he cut down the tree, and then they say, and he was therefore the best king ever. There was none greater before him. There was none greater after. And I think Isaiah is calling that the smug boast of a rapist. So again, I think that is the bridge. Now, there's more confirmation in Isaiah 5:20, but I'll get there in a second. This is the bridge between why do the prose versions have it one way and the visionary versions have it another. Well, it's because the prose versions, Kings, Chronicles, Exodus, also Josephus later and others, they're writing under the influence of the Deuteronomists and people like them, influences like the Deuteronomists, where they are, the post-Hezekiah order is described as being the true order. The lamp was just a lamp and it was always in the middle of the room. That's all there is to it. Whereas Matthew and Nephi and John, and if Matthew's right in attributing the Sermon on the Mount to being something that Jesus shared, then Jesus remembered that the true order was the one that preceded that. The true order was where the tree of life was in the Eden that you returned to, that you had to pass through the straight and narrow gate to get there. Now, there's a bit I do want to read verse 20. There's so much more we could talk about in Isaiah 5, but let me at least verse 20.
Verse 20 of
Isaiah 5. So he's recounted the rape, right? That we may know it. There's a howling mob. He says, "Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil." Now, that's interesting in itself because Emmanuel, the Prince, the Messiah, in Isaiah 7, is prophesied that he'll eat butter and honey being the food of the Holy of Holies, and he'll know good from evil. So that is apparently what is being confused here, the knowledge of good and evil. And put darkness for light and light for darkness. Now notice the change of verb. That matches the underlying Hebrew. It's not that you call good evil and evil good, but you put light for darkness and darkness for light. That's the verb samim. Samim, darkness for light. That means
that is fascinating, Dave. That is really interesting because again, what you're doing here is you're taking temple imagery and saying that this visionary man Isaiah is as Lehi did with his dream, right? Is using temple imagery. He's speaking of these things in code, but it's still temple imagery.
Yeah. 100%.
I mean, he's talking about the temple.
Yeah, 100%. And if you get it, you get it. And if you don't, this whole verse sounds like the same thing. It just sounds like moral confusion. They put light for darkness and darkness for light. No. They move the light.
Well, what they're doing is simple. I mean, I talk about, we talked about in my book there, the golden calf, right? And the idea of how they're pulling this down from Sinai. It's the same thing. They're taking what is precious and the most precious thing of Christ, the doctrine of Christ, Asherah, all these things together, and they're pulling it out from its most precious spot and bringing it down to them.
Yeah.
They're actually pulling it to, as Lehi would be saying, based on what you're saying, to the Hakal, to the great and spacious building.
Yeah. Yeah. And thereby making it the great and spacious building, and thereby turning the Holy of Holies, the Psalms, the imagery of the Psalms. Othmar Keel in his commentary talks about this. In the Psalms, the imagery of the Psalms is that it's a place of light and water and a garden. So, but the physical description is that it's a dark cave. That it's a dark cave. Well, this is the moment when it's made a dark cave. And it's because they move the light. They trade light for darkness and darkness for light. It's supposed to be the middle that's dark, that you come through into the light. Instead, the darkness is put at the end. And there's one last just amazing corroboration. This is the kind of detail that, like, on the one hand, the idea that Joseph Smith made this up and got it right is idiotic. No way. On the other hand, you cannot sit down with someone and walk them through everything they're going to have to understand to get to this point, because they just won't do it. They just want to shout horses, wheat, steel at you, right? And end the conversation. But there's just marvelous corroboration, because the last clause here of Isaiah 5:20 says, so they move the light in the second clause, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Okay, they put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Now, why is that interesting? It's interesting because of Exodus 15. Okay. Exodus 15, after the Song of the Sea. So it's like verses 20 to 25 or something here. Here we go. Verses 23 to 26, really. And I'll just summarize the story and I'll make the connection to the Book of Mormon. The Israelites are traveling in the desert. This is just after if you read it like a straight account, they've just crossed the Red Sea and left, and the Egyptians have not. They come to this place, which is called bitter. And they can't drink the waters because the waters were bitter. Mara means bitter. The waters were marim. The Maim waters were marim, bitter. And they say, what do we do about this? And he goes to the Lord, and the Lord shows him a tree. And when Moses throws into the water is made from being marim, bitter, is made matokim, sweet. Okay. And then they're able to drink it. So the presence of a tree, the presence of the tree revealed by the Lord, makes bitter waters sweet. By the way, after writing the book, I read the old Jewish mystical text, Sefer Bahir, and it talks about the story at the waters of Mara, and it says that tree was the tree of life. And it also says, subsequently, Satan came along and hid the tree of life, and Israelites couldn't find it anymore. Okay. But verse 20, in other words, they move bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. They've moved the tree of life. And they have turned the bitter waters into sweet and the sweet waters into bitter. And the words here are the same. Mar, and matok is the same as in Exodus 15. Moving the tree changes where there are waters that are bitter and are sweet. Now, here's the really interesting point, okay? There's water in 1 Nephi 8 in Lehi's vision. Mm-hmm. Weirdly, it is interpreted as two different values.
Yes.
Okay. 1 Nephi 11, in 11:25, the same verse where Nephi is talking about the tree, the tree is the love of God, and the waters are also the love of God. But then later, in his own vision, I don't know, chapter 13 maybe, but also again when he tells his brothers Laman and Lemuel in chapter 15, they are the filthy waters of hell. Mm-hmm. How on earth is it possible that in this dream, the waters are both the same thing as the tree of life and also the filthy waters of hell? Well, the answer is, where the tree is, the waters are sweet. And where the tree is not, i.e. in the Haykal, flowing along beside the great and spacious building with the jeering priests in the midst of darkness, where the tree is not, the waters are bitter. There's this astonishing little confirmation for Joseph Smith, which fits in exactly with what I think Isaiah is saying. Isaiah is saying, I saw the tree moved. It is the rape of an angel. It is the destruction of the true order of the temple. We could say more, but in Isaiah 6, the response is in the same way that Isaiah 4, the response is 7 women call a man. We'll give you the bread and the food. The name must be born. In Isaiah 6, it seems like the seraphim, the Lord is on his throne. Seraphim, who may also be the Lord, seraph comes forward, and the seraph heals his sin, forgives his sin, purifies him of his sin, and calls him to be of a prophet. So I think all 4 of those chapters are Isaiah's calling narrative. And I think they also show us the apostasy of his day, which is Hezekiah's day. And I think even though he referred, someone's going to say, but he says days of King Uzziah. Yeah, I know he says that. This is to your point. I think he's camouflaging somewhat. And this also shows us why we have 2 different apparent orders of the Holy of Holies in the scriptures.
Yeah, that is fascinating. And going back to Sinai again, you've got a burning bush, a lamp,
A tree of light.
a tree of light that is there again, that the children of Israel are not willing to go to, and they end up pulling down a different image and creating a molten calf. And where does, going back to the idea of Debir, where does Moses hear God from? Right, he hears him out of the bush,
Yeah.
out of the throne.
Yeah.
Right.
The voice speaks out of the throne, out of the tree of fire.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Let's finish up with this. Let's talk a little bit more about what is the tree of life.
Okay.
And thinking of First Nephi 11 and just talking about that.
Yeah.
We kind of think the same way on this. I've got a little bit of a variance on it, but tell us what you see as what is the tree of life and what is the context around it.
Yeah. So I think the Deuteronomic reformers hated. And let's remember, these guys were not priests. They were urban lawyers and scribes. These are white-collar intellectuals. That's who this is.
Mm-hmm.
Influenced by foreign ideas. Nephi seems to say that, but so does Moshe Weinfeld in his book Deuteronomy and the Deuteronomic School. It's Assyrian ideas that are shaping the book of Deuteronomy. So they're foreign intellectuals. They're like these American university professors who in their heart wish they were European. They're embarrassed they're Americans. Okay. So you know the type. So
yes.
So one of there's a lot they hated, but it seems to me, and this could be a long conversation, but it seems to me, I said it like 10 times, sorry. It seems to me that one of the things they really hated was the idea that God had a family. Any commentator will say the great thing, the core thing that Deuteronomy and the Deuteronomic writers insist on is that it's Yahweh aloneism, only Yahweh. Okay.
Only the Deuteronomists are anti-family.
Yeah. Well. So maybe, but also specifically, right? If your idea is okay, there's only one God and it's Yahweh, you're not really worried that people are going to start worshiping like Vishnu or something, right? That's not a big threat to you. It's the gods that people have previously thought were legitimate, including maybe gods who people previously thought were related to Yahweh. And so if previously some set of your fellow Judahites thought that, that God was a family, that there was a father and a mother and a son, and the king came forth as the great sign of the son who would one day himself come and offer himself as the sacrifice, like that's a problem. That's the thing you hate and got to stamp out. And I think there's a lot of ways we see that. One of them is in First Nephi 11, where Nephi asks for and receives a vision interpreting Lehi's vision. This is a very ancient pattern, by the way, characteristic of the apocalyptic literatures, twin visions that explain each other. We also see the same thing in First Nephi 1, vision of the tree, a fire on the rock, vision of the throne. It's actually the same thing. Lehi's vision, Lehi's dream, Nephi's vision. And to sort of shorten it, and I don't want to try and elide detail that it matters, because I know you and I are a very similar place here, but may have some nuance of difference, and that's great. Basically, Nephi says, I want to see what my father saw. And the guide says, do you believe that in the tree? And Nephi says, yeah, I believe in the tree. And I'm probably garbling this already. The guide shows him the tree. So it's explicitly the tree that Lehi saw. And we get some details here we didn't get before. The tree is white and the tree is beautiful. Then the that vision ends, and the guide says, "What did you see?" And I saw the tree that my father saw. I think that's where Nephi says is precious above all, right? And the guide says, "Blessed art thou, Nephi, because you've seen and believed," right? Man, I was going to summarize at a higher level than this. I should have just opened it and read it. It's okay. I'll keep going. This is approximate. So, and Nephi says, and the guy says, "What do you want to know?" Nephi says, "I want to know the meaning." So then he sees a couple things. He sees Jerusalem, and then he sees Nazareth. Now, by the way, Jerusalem as an answer to who is part of the answer to who the tree is, because Jerusalem in the writings of Isaiah is the daughter of Zion, or more recent translations tend to call it daughter Zion. And so when it's plural, the daughters of Zion, which refers to some mortal women, and then daughter Zion is a divine person. And the commentators will say that this is a personification of the city, right? In other words, hey, Isaiah didn't think this was actually a goddess. He's just literarily acting like he thinks it's a goddess, right? That's the standard commentator position. But another possibility is that actually he did understand that to him Jerusalem was the special place of the mother of the Lord, that it was Zion, that was its sacred name, right? So the answer, what is the tree? Bam, Jerusalem. Nazareth seems to be kind of like a transition. And then we see a virgin, and just like the tree is white and beautiful, she's described as being, I think it says fair and beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Fair, yeah.
Yeah. Which seems to me to mean white. So then in a subsequent scene, we see her holding a baby, right? I think it's the knowest thou the condescension of God. Here's a baby. By the way, I read, and I can't remember where I read this. I got to go read the flyleaf of all of my commentaries and find where I read this. Some commentator talking about the phrase condescension of God and saying it always involved the scenes with the throne. It was a scene typical of the throne. I got to go find that comment. Because again, if the tree is Jerusalem, is the woman, and the fruit is the baby, and this is my reading, and you may have some agreement, some difference with it, then the baby in the woman's arms is Jesus being held by Mary, but it's also the king upon his throne, and it's also the Christ crucified upon the tree. And it's also Christ standing beside the tree of life and welcoming you back to it, right? These symbols are multivalent. It's all of those things at the same time. So later, verse 25, when Nephi's talking more and he asks about the tree of life, and I think initially the guide is said to be the Spirit of the Lord, and then after Jesus is born, it's an angel, right? There's like a change of guide in there.
It's a change of guide, yeah.
Yeah.
So it looks like originally this is the Spirit of the Lord being Jehovah.
Yeah.
That is his guide, and then he leaves and goes down in the vision, basically, so to speak, as the baby.
Right. And to your point, this is drama, right? Mm-hmm. He steps into the scene as the baby, and then another person comes up and says, I will take up the narration. Yes. And the tree of life is the love of God, and the waters are also the love of God. Now, love in Hebrew, including biblical Hebrew, can mean lover. So what I think, and like there's more to say on this, but I think that the tree of life is the menorah. It is the throne, but it is, symbolically, it's the throne. I think the throne's a whole other conversation. Forget that. It's symbolically the throne. I think it is the mother. It is the divine mother of God. And so my reading of 1 Nephi 11 is, yes, Mary is in there, but Mary is in there sort of as the person, hey, this person is going to do the role, right? This person's very important, right? She's very special. I don't mean to demean Mary, but like the role is bigger than her. The role is the role of the tree of life, the mother of Yahweh. She's going to be the mortal part.
She's a type.
She's going to be the type. Yeah, that's a good word. The mortal partner of the divine woman in bringing forth this very special, unique divine son. So that's what I think the tree of life is. I think it's the divine woman. It's God the mother. It's one of the things that Deuteronomists really hated. It's one of the things that we know nevertheless was immensely popular among the non-elites during the kingdom of Judah, from the time of Isaiah to Jerusalem. Various archaeological finds tell us that she was hugely popular. And Nephi says that is the tree is the thing that is precious above all.
Yeah. What's interesting is, so here you have, I don't know if it's a psychological thing or a sociological thing, or if it's just a water travels downhill, a spiritual entropy thing. Maybe but you have with the Deuteronomists, why do they want to get rid of all this family of God? What is the point? What does it benefit them in their theology or in their power structure or whatever it is? How does it benefit them in their belief system to get rid of the son and the mother, right? Because that's what they're doing. They're getting rid of the son and the mother primarily. And of course, the concourses of angels to some degree, the hosts of heaven.
Yes, 100%.
Right?
100%.
Which is us, I think. That's the way I look at it.
Yes.
We are part of that participation. This is Abraham 3 to me. This is, yes, Abraham, you are one of the great noble ones. This is getting rid of all of that.
Yes.
Getting rid of the visions that we see over and over again with a throne in the center, and then, Lehi's vision with the 12 around, and then the concourses of angels, or the 24 elders around the throne in Book of Revelation. And, I call it flattening the hierarchy. They're pulling everything together into a single one. And then what happens later on? Well, after the New Testament, after the Gospels, where you actually have witnesses of Jesus Christ, you don't get rid of the thought of Jesus Christ in the religion, because I always look inward to the religion. I don't care about those that are atheists or whatever else. Within the religion, what do? Well, you have Hellenistic ideas, philosophies that come in, and all of a sudden, one, which in Hebrew is echad, is really actually just the number one. It's not union. It's not a plethora of gods and a family of God. It's a trinity of one single God.
Yeah.
So they've done the same thing again.
Yeah.
Right. They've flattened everything out. They've gotten rid of everything. Now there's just a personage. Of course, the mother's gone again. It's just an odd thing to me that this is. I understand getting rid of Jesus Christ in pre Christ as mortal, right? It's that I get. It happens throughout the entire Book of Mormon. You can get rid of judgment, like with the Ammonites. Just get rid of judgment because you don't need a Christ anymore. There's no purpose for it.
Yeah.
But afterward, it's the same pressures, the same spiritual entropy that comes about as with the Deuteronomists. Yeah.
It's so interesting. History rhymes, right? I can't remember who said that. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. I don't know what's so attractive to that about humans, or maybe it's not, right? I think you and I are probably both of us not constituted to immediately want to run and cry sexism, but like maybe there's something built into men here, right? Men just cannot abide. Cannot abide the idea of a family, right? Like your question's so good. You said, well, what do they get out of it? It is a great question. Maybe they get feeling cool out of it, right? Now our religion is respectable. I mean, you see this again a lot in modern days. People who are not content to be Mormon. They have to be Mormon with some kind of an asterisk, so that they can be acceptable to, their social or intellectual peer group they want, right? I wonder also if, the related sort of impulse, at least in kind of the Deuteronomist, the 8th century, is centralization, right? Trying to get everything in Jerusalem into the control of one set of hands. And I wonder if it's much harder to bottle up, like thinking about like, okay, so if a mother in heaven is invoked, for example, every time that a child is born, like that's pretty hard to, you're gonna have people who's doing this all the time. You can't be like, come into Jerusalem when you have your baby or right when like maybe that's just a harder impulse or a harder kind of spiritual idea to drag into the center of the city. That's the thing that's going to keep happening out in the farms, and therefore out of your control unless you stop it, unless you say, don't do this. This is pagan. You are witches.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because it happened again. I believe that there is some semblance of this, of what's happening even within the culture in the West, and to some degree then also that permeates within the church. And I think we can learn a lot from the Deuteronomists if we understand more their will and purpose and why it's so important to them to change. So
yeah,
interesting thoughts. Dave, thanks so much for coming back and going over this. For everyone, again, the book is In the Language of Adam. Tell us where we can go get it. Where's the best place to get it?
Anywhere. plainandpreciouspublishing.com is great, but Amazon is also great. If this airs before Friday, September 13th, you can come see me at 7 p.m. in the St. George Tabernacle. I'll be talking about some of this stuff, and then I'll be at a bookstore down the street afterwards for as long as they'll let me stay.
Awesome. Dave, appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Greg.